President Trump nominates former Federal Reserve Governor Kevin Warsh to be the next Fed chairman. Warsh is a longtime critic of the central bank's policies and handling of post-pandemic inflation. But could this mean lower interest rates? NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
In the whole country, I would say that this was the perfect candidate.
President Trump is nominating Kevin Warsh to become the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Warsh is no stranger to the Fed, confirmed by the Senate as Fed governor back in 2006, the youngest ever in that role at 35. Warsh has been a critic of the current Federal Reserve System, particularly for its policies since the pandemic, saying the Fed has become too involved in areas beyond its role.
They need institutions like the Federal Reserve to be restored to what they once were, which is important institutions that are on the sidelines most of the time.
And change, he says, is unlikely to happen unless...
I think until there's regime change at the Fed, until there's new people running the Fed, a new operating framework, they're stuck with their old mistakes.
But with the Fed chair only having a single vote of 7 on the Board of Governors, is regime change really possible?
I think the Fed chairman is a key component to that larger regime change. The Fed chairman has a tremendous amount of sway in terms of the operations of the Fed, who is actually working there. And with him at the helm of the Fed, I think you would see the deep structural reforms throughout that institution that are needed to really return it to sound monetary policy.
The pick ends months of anticipation over who would succeed current Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, whose term is up in May, but will still serve as a decision maker on the Fed Board of Governors for another 2 years. Now, Trump wants the Fed to cut interest rates sharply, making loans cheaper for everyday Americans. When asked if he talked to Warsh about cutting interest rates, Trump said,
I don't want to ask him that question. I think it's inappropriate, probably, but he certainly wants to cut rates. I've been watching him for a long time.
At the same time, the Justice Department's investigating Powell over renovations of the central bank's building. Powell says that Trump is doing this out of retribution for not lowering interest rates. But Trump says,
this is a small little complex that's costing billions of dollars, most expensive job per square foot ever built. It's either gross incompetence or it's theft.
Senator Tom Tillis, on the other hand, has vowed to block Warsh's confirmation until the DOJ ends its probe into Powell. Now, ultimately, whether Kevin Warsh can steer the Fed through this turbulent era first depends on a Senate confirmation battle, which so far looks promising as there's not too much pushback from Republicans to get that simple majority that he needs. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The latest batch of the Epstein files were made public today. Here's Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche speaking from the Justice Department.
Today, we are producing more than 3 million pages, including more than 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. In total, that means that the department produced approximately 3.5 million pages in compliance with the Act.
Blanche said some of the files were not taken by Epstein or someone around him, but were found on Epstein's devices. The Justice Department said it did not release 6 million pages of files that contain either personal identification information of victims or depictions of child pornography, death, physical abuse, or injury. Blanche said they are protecting the identity of victims by redacting the face of every woman except Ghislaine Maxwell. He added they did not remove any images of men unless it was impossible to remove the woman without redacting the man. Today's release came after President Trump signed the Epstein Files Transparency Act last November. The department said it is committed to protecting victims of sex and human trafficking.